Hi guys! In this video I'm going to explain all about this guy. Do you know what it is? It is a metronome. And in this video I'm going to discuss the benefits of practicing with a metronome and when you should not practice with a metronome. Also what metronomes there are and all about practicing with the metronome and how to do that as a beginner as well as an intermediate or advanced player. Practicing more difficult rhythms. There are different types of metronomes. Now this guy is an old-fashioned mechanical metronome. You wind it up and it just ticks in a certain tempo and you can move that bar on the needle to make it slower or faster. That's all a metronome needs to do. Now, there are also electronic metronomes that do the same as a mechanical metronome. You just don't need to wind it. You instead need to replace the batteries. And there are online metronomes like this one that I'm launching today. Yay! And online metronomes can be on a website or on an app or both, like mine. And you can use it in the same way as you do with a mechanical or an electronic metronome. The advantage of online metronomes is that you probably always have it with you, that in the case of my metronome it's free, and also that you have some extra options that we will discuss. Now, why on earth would you want to practice with a metronome? You probably heard that you should practice with a metronome, but why? One reason is to be able to play with a steady pulse. Then you can also tackle fast runs by practicing with a metronome. You can practice difficult rhythms. You can get your piece performance ready. You'll be a good partner to play together with, because if your rhythm is going everywhere, then an accompanist or someone you are playing with can't possibly follow you. And last but not least, you can practice vibrato with a metronome. Now I will explain all about that all in this video. Now a common reason I hear not to practice with a metronome is because I can't express myself. Yes, a metronome can be brutal, pointing out where you are not playing rock steady, so to say. Now, talking about expression, of course you shouldn't always play with a metronome. Now, I have a funny story about that, because I played in a string quartet years ago and the violist in the string quartet was someone who practiced everything with a metronome. She did everything with a metronome. So we were always making jokes that if she stirred soup, she would do it with a metronome. And if she was in bed with a metronome. Now, making mistakes in your rhythm and playing things rhythmically incorrect has nothing to do with musical expression. Because in order to express yourself, you must first really know the piece, really know the meaning, and then you can consciously decide to take some rhythmical freedom here and there where it fits the expression of the piece. If you're just doing random things, then that has nothing to do with musical expression. Because if you don't really know the piece, know its meaning, then how can you express that meaning? And if you're watching my tutorials and my performance videos for a while, you might say, yeah, but Zlata, you didn't play even eighth notes in that tango. Sometimes I hear that. Now, in jazz and tango, it's very normal that you take some rhythmical freedom in eighth notes. And in jazz, it's very normal to play every first of two eighth notes, for example, a bit longer. So, pam, pa, pam, pa, pam, pa, pam. So there is a time and place for deliberate musical rhythmical freedom. Now, when to practice with the metronome and when not. Now, you need to know very well when to practice with the metronome and when to not practice with the metronome, because having the metronome on all the time can even hurt your playing. Now, if you're practicing rhythm, obviously, then you're practicing with a metronome. Of course, sometimes you put the metronome off because your rhythm should be internalized. You shouldn't be dependent on the metronome, because in a performance you can't take your metronome along to support you and hold your hand through your performance. So our end goal as musicians is to play without a metronome. For example, if you're practicing for intonation, you are also practicing without the metronome, because if you're just focusing on intonation, you should be on a note and repeat it all the time and give it as much bows as you want and as much time as you want to be able to correct your intonation. So I asked you guys questions about practicing with a metronome, and then someone said, yeah, and I have to shift and I have to do bowing and I have to do this and this and this and that, all at the same time. Well, how do you practice that all at the same time? You don't, because you need to practice one thing at a time. So you're either practicing for rhythm, or you're practicing for intonation, or you're practicing for a certain technique you encounter, and then you put that together. But you can't learn all these things at the same time. And yes, it might cost you some time. That's life. Now, in the end, if you are too dependent on your own metronome, you might end up playing in a mechanical way. And by the way, the colleague violist, maybe she's watching, didn't play at all in a mechanical way, but she did everything with a metronome. And she really was good at rhythm. I know. Now, speaking of rhythms, I will explain all about rhythms and time signatures and how to practice with a metronome as a beginner later in this video. Now, why is it so difficult specifically for violinists to practice with a metronome? That's because we never have the metronome as close as the violin, except if you would tape the metronome on your forehead, but that's not really practical. So you will hear the violin louder than the metronome. And also, if you are playing really rhythmically, then you will kind of play away the beats, so to say. So if you hear the beats and then your note, maybe there's a microsecond between them, then you are reactive to the metronome. Well, in a rhythm, you should be in the rhythm. So you shouldn't hear the beat and react by playing, but you should play away that beat. Now, the thing with most metronome apps and most online metronomes is that you don't have this clear needle, this clear pendulum that mechanical metronomes have. And that's why up until now that I designed my own metronome is I practiced with the mechanical metronome I showed you earlier in this video, because I couldn't hear the metronome and I couldn't play along with the metronome simply because I couldn't hear it, because my violin for me is closer and louder, so there was no way, and I really wanted to see that pendulum swing all the time because I followed the metronome on sight and not by ear, and that's how violinists will play with a metronome. And this is different for if you are playing the piano, where you have your metronome maybe closer to your ear than the grand piano. I heard some of you saying like, yeah, for violin you shouldn't practice with a metronome. Well, that's total nonsense, because all serious violinists practice with a metronome at some point. Now you might be wondering, does it make any sense to practice with a metronome as a beginner? I wish I did, because the metronome has always been my friend and foe. I always have had some sort of love-hate relationship with it. And I know that if I started practicing with a metronome earlier on in my violin journey, I started playing the violin at the age of 8, and I think somewhere in my teenage years, around 13 or 14, I got my first electronic old metronome, which was back in the day where dinosaurs were still roaming the earth. But I played lots of years without a metronome, and when the metronome was introduced, it was really difficult for me to practice with a metronome, and it took me a long time before I really benefited from practicing with the metronome. And if you're serious about the violin, then you need to practice with the metronome at some point, and you better do it in the beginning, because otherwise it will be difficult. So don't make the same mistake that I did, but you know, I was 8, I didn't really know any better. Now, for this purpose, I will show you the desktop version of my free online metronome. By the way, the link is below. And the metronome has all sort of subdivisions, and this is really easy if you are practicing difficult rhythms, but as a beginner it's great to learn the note values. Now on the page that I'll link underneath violinhouse.com/metronome, I explain all the note values and the time signatures. I'm not going to explain them in this video because this video is getting very long as it is. But I'll show you how to practice those different rhythms and note values. So you go to my metronome, switch my metronome on. And then I will, you can of course clap along with this, but this is not so difficult. And then you can practice eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then repeat all that on the violin, maybe an open string. Just to get used to that rhythm, maybe in a scale. This is great rhythm practice as a beginner. 16th note maybe. Etc. And triplets. Some of you have difficulty with triplets. Chocolate, 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 chocolate. You can maybe tap it with a pen, clap it. And for a beginner, triplets can be confusing because you alternate starting the triplet on a down bow or an up bow. So maybe this is not the right tempo for you to start it, so I'll change the tempo to 60 beats per minute. And it can be very useful to put a little accent on the start of each triplet. And then continue like that. Now, what a lot of beginners have difficulty with are dotted rhythms. And they can be a triplet with a quarter note and an eighth note. And also with a dotted eighth and a 16th note. And there's a difference between the two. And a lot of people, even intermediate players, have lots of difficulty with really letting that difference sound. So definitely practice this on one note. And in my metronome I've arranged it in such a way that there is a different sound for the note on the beat and the other note. So then you can really hear it and get used to it. You can also use my metronome. Beep, bum, beep, bum, beep. You see there's a difference if I go to real dotted rhythm. It's different. And we talked about the trickiness of triplets. Then transitioning to and from triplets can be hard. And you go to the last rhythm of my metronome. Chocolate, chocolate, ice cream, chocolate, chocolate, ice cream. That's how you can practice that. And also, of course, first practice it on one note and then later play the piece that you want to play. Now, you saw me changing the number of beats per minute a couple of times. Then a metronome goes faster or slower. And you might be wondering, okay, but how do I decide at what tempo I should play the piece that I'm playing? Well, I've created the most comprehensive list of Italian words that you see in your music connected to the beats per minute. So check that out at violinhouse.com/metronome. There you'll find my free metronome to use, but you'll also find a lot of information about note values, how to read time signatures, and also how to decide how many beats per minute. So you can figure that all out. Then you know the notes that you read, what value they are. You know what to practice on the metronome. And you also know at what speed you need to set the metronome. Now what I'd like to do is have you practice along with me with some different repertoire examples. So you know exactly how to use your metronome in your practice. And also how to use the metronome to tackle fast runs. What's also coming up later in this video is how to practice vibrato with the metronome. Now let's start with a more beginner piece with Kugler Concertino Opus 11. I have tutorials on that. It's really fun and easy to play concertino. And in the rondo, so the third movement, it has dotted rhythms. So we're going to practice those. Now the movement is allegro, but of course when we are just practicing this, we should go to a lower tempo. Now first I would suggest to put a metronome to eighth notes. So we have here 3 beats for the dotted quarter note, 1 beat for the eighth notes, and it's a 2/4 measure. So let's set the beats to 2 And then we have eighth notes. So we're going to practice this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. And then I'm counting in eighth notes. Now what I could also do is to go to the dotted rhythm, but that's a dotted eighth and 16th note. That doesn't matter because you can correct it with the beats per minute. You see, so with this method you can exactly hear and play this rhythm. Now I'd like to go to another example, Howell's Moving Castle, which is in a 3/4 measure. And as a lot of popular music is all in 4/4, 2/4, people are so used to that, and sometimes people don't really play 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but they play 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So they just say 1, 2, 3, but they actually make the third note just a lot longer. So what I see a lot of people do, if they encounter a 3/4 measure, they do. So they make it into a 4/4 measure. Now, the tempo of this piece is around 136, but let's practice slowly first. Put the metronome to 100 beats per minute. And then I will put the beats to 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now let's tackle a fast run in the third movement of Vivaldi's Autumn Concerto. Now first I need to get this run rhythmically. And these are 30-second notes, and putting the metronome on eighth notes might make them sloppy. So I really want to practice them in 16th notes. Now let's find a comfortable tempo. So we put a metronome in 16th notes, and it's a 3/8 measure. So I put the beats in 3. Now let's see what happens. Now I think this will be a little bit too fast to start out with. Let's... Now in this way I can train myself to make it a little bit less sloppy. But what I can also do is to just pick out a different rhythm to practice this. Rhythmical variations are great for fast runs. Now I have this, I can increase the tempo a bit. And let's do it the other way around. Now I can do that for a while, and then let's go back to the 16th notes again. You see, it already goes smoother. I didn't touch this piece in a while. Now let's put the metronome in eighth notes and see if I can keep up, because now I have to play 4 notes inside of each eighth notes. And then let's increase the tempo. So if you're practicing a fast run, increase slowly, about 5 to 15 beats per minute per day, until you're on the right tempo, and also around 5 beats per minute at a time. So now let's go to 55, for example. Now I notice that I'm messing it up a bit. So let's go back to 16th notes so that I play it more evenly. And you can do this back and forth all the time. Now what's also great to do is to push for speed. So to suddenly go 20 beats per minute higher. Let's see how much of a mess I make of that. you see that I'm messing it up. But what the great thing is, if you do that for a short while, I'll not bore you with that. If you go back, this suddenly seems much slower, so to say. Now, a little warning here. If you go to use the strategy push for speed, then I really recommend ending your practice session with a really correct version. So if I would end practicing this, because your mind and your ear and your hands will remember the last version you played. If that's the pushed version where it got sloppy, then that's not good. Now, what if you can't keep up with the metronome? Then you're probably playing it too fast, so use the tips that I gave you to speed up the tempo gradually. And yes, that can take some time, but again, that's life. And if you notice that you're practicing fast runs very long, but for example in a Bach chic or something, then you have a lot of the same value notes. And then you will see that maybe if you play like a couple of bars, it goes all right. And if you paste them together and you want to play the whole piece, that you start tensing up and that kind of stuff, then my tip is to practice maybe 1 bar, then 2 bars, then 3 bars, then a whole line maybe. And if that goes all right and practice every line that way, then start playing 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines in a row. And try to keep your technique relaxed in between. So that's a strategy for if you have lots of fast notes for a long time. Then you can tackle that in this way. But most of the times, if you feel that you can't keep up, that the metronome is rushing you, you have the metronome too fast and you need to go back a little bit and build it up from there. Now I'd like to go a little bit back in Vivaldi Autumn to the first movement, and I'll show you how to practice complex rhythms where you have a lot of changes in note values, rests, all that kind of stuff. So let's, for example, go to bar 40 of the first movement of Vivaldi Autumn. Then you first have triplets, then you have 30-second notes. It's all kinds of stuff, and also longer notes. So let's see how I would recommend practicing this. Now, if you're not so familiar with triplets, you might just want to put a metronome on triplets and then practice them in this slow tempo. And do it in that way. Then you can move on to 8th notes, because each triplet is here 1/8 note, and you can do 1 beat per triplet. Now we have some changes in the note values. If you go to bar number 41, for example, you see we have an 8th note, and after that 30-second notes. Now a lot of people have difficulty with making the distinction, because we have the tendency to make that 8th note into a 16th note. So but maybe we should practice this in 16th note, so we can really make that 8th note 2 beats, and we can play 2 30-second notes per beat. So make the distinction: 30-second notes, 8th notes, and a quarter note and quarter note rest. So the 8th note is now 2 beats, the quarter note is now 4 beats, and we put 2 of the 30-second notes into 1 beat. And when you're used to that, you can maybe put the beat to 8th notes. So now the beat is 8th notes. So the 8th note is 1 beat, and the 30-second notes are 4 in 1 beat, and the quarter note is 2 beats. So the methodology in practicing difficult rhythms is to put the beat of the metronome on a very small note value. Maybe the smallest note value, but I don't recommend really putting beats on all the 30-second notes, because yeah, that really gets the flow out of the music. But by all means do it. If you want to do it with my metronome, it goes up until 16th note beats, but if you want to really have 32nd note beats, then you can of course just double the beats per minute. That's how to do that. Now let's go into another difficult rhythm where we have some syncopation. One of the rhythms inside my metronome is syncopation. That's all the 2 half notes that you see. What the metronome does then is that it lets you hear syncopated half notes. Now, if I look at bar number 80 of Vivaldi Autumn First Movement, then we have syncopated quarter notes. So let's put the metronome a bit faster. Then you could practice this with playing against the beat. So let's do that just on one note. So you hear bum, bim, bum, bim. And now you know that the beat is the lower pitch and the higher pitch is the syncope. 2, 1, 2, 1. So then your note starts off the beat, but you still hear a higher pitched beat, so you can follow it along. So, we can use the methodology that I just used earlier. If we go to bar 80, is that I say, okay, I see that the smallest note value are 16th notes. So what I do here is that I just put my metronome, well, that's maybe a little bit fast. And then I can put it to 8th notes. I find it's only confusing to use 16th notes here, but maybe it's useful for you. Etc. So I find this a little bit easier, and then I can speed it up from there, or maybe put the metronome at some point at quarter note. So now you know a little bit of the methodology behind practicing with the metronome. Now last but not least, as I promised, how to practice vibrato with the metronome. Now a lot of people know a little bit how to do vibrato, but they are not really satisfied about the sound. And most of the time this is a tempo issue. So either your vibrato is not regular, or it's too slow, or it's too fast. Now if your vibrato is too slow, it becomes... If it's too fast, then it becomes something like that. And if it's not regular, then it sounds really drunk, like... Then you don't even recognize it to be vibrato. Now you can fix that with a metronome. What you do is you put your metronome at 60 beats per minute, and then you start it. Then it's really slow. And you do 1 vibrato movement per beat. And if you start with this, you might be thinking, like, yeah, but I can do it faster, I don't need to start there. But this is meant to control the movement of your vibrato, not to do it in this tempo. So focus on the up movement. Up, 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 up. Now, and then you can make it slightly faster. So let's go to 8th notes. And what is very useful, I find, with my students is to practice vibrato in triplets. And it already starts to sound a little bit more like a real vibrato than 16th notes. Now, and speed this all up slowly, the same way as you would speed up a fast run, until you reach a vibrato sound that you are happy with. Now I I hope in this video, now this video got way longer than I intended it to be. Now, grab your free metronome at violinlounge.com/metronome, and on that page I also have for you all the information about reading time signatures, about tempo markings. You can find the list with all the Italian words and how many beats per minute they should be. So I hope that is a resource that you will save and enjoy for many years. Now, if you made it up until here, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in one of my other videos. Bye!